They called me defective during Toteminovita, and by age after 3 doctors examined my frail body and pronounced their verdict, I started to believe them. My name is Thomas Beaumont Callahan, and my body has always been a betrayal. A collection of failures written in bone and muscle that never properly formed. I was born premature, arriving early during one of the coldest winters Mississippi had seen in decades. My mother, Sarah Beaumont Callahan, went into labor unexpectedly during a dinner party my father was hosting for visiting judges and planters. The midwife who attended her, an enslaved woman named Mama Ruth, who delivered half the white babies in the county, took one look at me and shook her head. "Judge Callahan," she told my father, "this baby won't make it through the night. He's too small, his breathing is shallow. Best prepare your wife for the loss." But my mother, delirious with fever and exhaustion, refused to accept that prognosis. "He'll live," she whispered, holding my tiny body against her chest. "I know he will. I can feel his heart beating. It's weak, but it's fighting." She was right. I survived that first night and the next and the next. But surviving isn't the same as thriving. At 1 month, I weighed barely 6 pounds. At 6 months, I still couldn't hold up my own head. At 1 year, when other babies were standing and some were taking their first steps, I could barely sit upright. The doctors my father brought in from Natchez, from Vicksburg, from as far away as New Orleans, all said the same thing. Premature birth had stunted my development in ways that would affect me for life. My mother died when I was 6 years old, victim to the yellow fever epidemic that swept through Mississippi. I remember her lying in bed, her skin the color of old parchment, her eyes yellowed and distant. She called me to her bedside the day before she died. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you're going to face challenges your whole life. People will underestimate you, they'll pity you, they'll dismiss you, but you have something more valuable than physical strength. You have your mind, your heart, your soul. Don't let anyone make you feel less than whole." And she died the next morning. And I didn't fully understand her words until years later. My father, Judge William Callahan, was a formidable man in every way I wasn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that could silence a courtroom with a single word. He'd built his fortune from nothing. Started as a poor lawyer from Alabama, married into the Beaumont family's modest plantation, and through shrewd investments and strategic land acquisitions, transformed those initial acres into a vast cotton empire. Callahan Plantation sat on the high bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, south of Natchez in what was considered the richest soil in the South. The main house was a Greek Revival mansion my father had built. 2 stories of white-painted brick with massive Doric columns, wide galleries on both levels, and tall windows that caught the river breeze. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, imported furniture filled rooms large enough to host balls for guests, and Persian rugs covered floors of polished heart pine. Behind the main house stretched the working plantation, the cotton gin, the blacksmith shop, the carpentry workshop, the smokehouse, the laundry, the kitchen building, the overseer's house, and beyond all that, the quarters. Rows of small cabins where hundreds of enslaved people lived in conditions that contrasted sharply with the mansion's luxury. I grew up in this world of extreme wealth built on extreme brutality, though as a child I didn't understand the full implications. I was tutored at home by a succession of teachers my father hired. I was too frail for the rough and tumble of school, too sickly to board at academies where other planters' sons went. Instead, I learned Greek and Latin, mathematics and literature, history and philosophy in the quiet of my father's library. By the time I was considered a young man, I stood short, the height of a boy entering puberty. My frame was slight, weighing little, with bones so delicate that Dr. Harrison once commented I had the skeleton of a bird. My chest caved inward slightly, a condition the doctors called pectus excavatum, the result of ribs that had never properly formed. My hands trembled constantly, a fine tremor that made simple tasks like writing or holding a teacup an exercise in concentration. My eyesight was terrible, requiring thick spectacles that magnified my pale blue eyes to an almost comical size. Without them, the world was a blur. My voice had never fully deepened, remaining in that awkward range between boy and man. My hair was fine and light brown, thinning already despite my youth. My skin was pale, almost translucent, showing every vein beneath the surface. But the worst part, the part that would ultimately define my fate, was my complete lack of masculine development. I had no facial hair to speak of, just a few wispy strands on my upper lip that I shaved more out of hope than necessity. My body was hairless, smooth as a child's, and the doctor's examinations had confirmed what my father had suspected. My reproductive organs were severely underdeveloped, rendering me sterile. The examinations began shortly after a birthday. My father had arranged for me to meet a potential bride, Martha Henderson, daughter of a wealthy planter from Port Gibson. The meeting was a disaster. Martha took one look at me and couldn't hide her disgust. She made polite conversation before claiming a headache and leaving. I overheard her telling her mother as they departed, "Father can't seriously expect me to marry that child. He looks like he'd break in half on our wedding night." After that humiliation, my father summoned Drive. Harrison. Dr. Samuel Harrison was Natchez' most prominent physician, a Yale-educated man who specialized in what he called matters of masculine health and heredity. He arrived at Callahan Plantation on a humid morning, carrying a leather medical bag and an air of clinical detachment. My father left us alone in his study. Dr. Harrison had me undressed completely, then conducted the most humiliating hour of my life. He measured me, height, weight, chest circumference, limb length. He examined every inch of my body, making notes in a small leather journal. He paid particular attention to my groin, manipulating my underdeveloped testicles, commenting aloud about their size and consistency. Significantly below normal, he muttered, writing, "Prepubertal in appearance and texture." When he finished, he had me dress and called my father back into the room. "Judge Callahan, Drive," Harrison said, settling into a leather chair. "I'll be direct. Your son's condition is not merely constitutional frailty. He suffers from what we call hypogonadism, a failure of the sexual organs to develop properly. This was likely caused by his premature birth and subsequent developmental delays." My father's face remained impassive. What does this mean for his future, for marriage, and continuation of the family line? Dr. Harrison glanced at me, then back at my father. "Judge, the likelihood of your son producing offspring is virtually non-existent. The testicular tissue is insufficient for spermatogenesis, the production of viable seed. His hormone production is clearly deficient, as evidenced by his lack of secondary sexual characteristics. Even if he were to marry, consummation might prove difficult, and conception would be, in my professional opinion, impossible." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Impossible. My father was silent for a long moment. "You're absolutely certain?" "As certain as medical science allows. I've seen perhaps a dozen cases like this in my career. None produce children." "I see. Thank you, Drive, Harrison. I'll have your payment sent to your office." After the doctor left, my father poured himself bourbon and stared out the window at the river. "Father, I'm sorry," I said quietly. He didn't turn around. "For what?" "For being born early. For being sickly. For being—" He trailed off, took a long drink. "Not your fault, Thomas, but it is our reality." But my father wasn't satisfied with one opinion. A week later, another doctor arrived from Vicksburg. He was younger, more aggressive in his examination, rougher in his handling of my body. But his conclusion was identical: severe hypogonadism with associated sterility. The condition is permanent and untreatable. The third doctor came from New Orleans. Dr. Antoine Merrier was a Creole physician who'd studied in Paris and spoke with a thick French accent. He was the gentlest of the three, apologizing for the invasive nature of the examination. But his verdict was the same. "Je suis désolé, but your son, he cannot father children. The development it is arrested. Nothing can be done." 3 doctors, 3 examinations, 3 identical conclusions. Thomas Beaumont Callahan was sterile, unfit for breeding, incapable of continuing the family line. The news spread through Mississippi's planter society with the speed and thoroughness of gossip among people who had nothing better to do than discuss each other's business. My father made no effort to keep it secret. What would be the point? Any woman who agreed to marry me would need to know. Better to be honest up front than face recriminations later. The Hendersons withdrew their daughter from consideration immediately. Other prominent families all suddenly found reasons why their daughters were unsuitable or already promised elsewhere. But it wasn't just the private rejections that hurt. It was the public comments. I overheard a woman at church. "Such a pity about the Callahan boy. The judge has all that wealth and no proper heir to leave it to. Makes you wonder what the point is. At a dinner party my father hosted, one of the guests, drunk on my father's fine whiskey, said loudly enough for me to hear from the hallway, "It's nature's way, isn't it? The weak ones aren't supposed to reproduce. Keeps the stock healthy." A visiting planter from Louisiana examining a horse my father was selling commented, "Fine animal. Strong lines, good conformation, proven stud. Not like that son of yours, eh. Sometimes breeding just fails." Each comment was a knife, but I'd learned to show no reaction. What would be the point? They were right in the terms they understood. I was defective merchandise, a failed investment, a dead-end branch on the family tree. My father withdrew into himself. He still ran the plantation with his usual efficiency, still served as county judge, still attended social functions. But at home, he was increasingly distant, spending long hours in his study with bourbon and legal documents, working on something he wouldn't discuss with me. I retreated into books. My father's library contained thousands of volumes, and I'd read most of them. I particularly loved philosophy and poetry. I found solace in words written by men who'd contemplated suffering, mortality, and the human condition. I also began exploring books my father didn't know were in his library, volumes that previous owners had left behind. These included abolitionist literature that was technically illegal in Mississippi. I read these forbidden books late at night when the house was quiet, and they disturbed me profoundly. I'd grown up accepting slavery as natural, as ordained by God. But these books presented a different picture. Frederick Douglass wrote with intelligence and eloquence that matched any white author I'd read. He described the brutality of slavery. I began noticing things I'd previously ignored. The scars on the backs of field hands. The way enslaved people's expressions went blank and subservient when white people approached. The children who looked suspiciously like my father's overseers. The women who disappeared from the fields for months, then returned without the babies they'd obviously carried. But I did nothing with these observations. I was too weak, too dependent, too compromised by my own comfort to challenge the system. My father made another attempt at finding me a bride. He contacted families outside Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia. He lowered his standards, approaching families of lesser wealth and social standing. He offered increasingly generous dowries, guaranteeing that any woman who married me would live in luxury. The responses were variations on a theme. "Thank you for your generous offer, but Caroline is already promised to another. We appreciate your interest, but we don't feel it would be a suitable match. While your son seems a fine young man, we're looking for a situation with different prospects." That last one was particularly cruel. Different prospects was a polite way of saying a husband who can give us grandchildren. Eventually, my father had stopped trying. We ate dinner together in silence most nights. The clink of silver on china, the only sound in the massive dining room. Sometimes he'd look at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment certainly, but also something like desperation. The explosion came. It was late evening and my father had been drinking more than usual. I was in the library reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius when he burst in. "Thomas, we need to talk." I sat down the book. "Yes, Father." He sat down heavily, bourbon sloshing in his glass. "I'm old. I could die tomorrow or live another many years, but either way, I'll die eventually. And when I do, what happens to all this?" He gestured vaguely at the room, the house, the plantation beyond. "The estate will go to our nearest male relative, I suppose. Cousin Robert in Alabama." Cousin Robert, my father spat, is an incompetent drunk who's lost plantations to bad debt. He'd sell this place within a year and drink away the profits. Everything I've built would be gone. "I'm sorry, Father. I know this isn't the situation you wanted. Sorry doesn't solve the problem." He stood up, began pacing. "I've tried everything. Months of searching for a wife who'd accept you despite your condition. No one will. No one wants a husband who can't produce heirs. That's the reality. I know. So, I've had to think creatively, very creatively about solutions that push the boundaries of convention." Something in his tone made me uneasy. "What do you mean?" He stopped pacing, looked directly at me. "I'm giving you to Delilah." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What? Delilah the field hand. I'm giving her to you as your companion." Your wife in practical terms. The words made no sense. Father, you cannot possibly be suggesting. I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you what's going to happen. His voice was hard now. The voice he used in court when pronouncing sentence. No white woman will marry you. That's established fact. But the Callahan line needs to continue. The plantation needs heirs, even if those heirs are unconventional. The full horror of what he was proposing hit me. You want me to, with a slave woman. Father, that's, even if I could, which the doctors say I can't, that's not how inheritance works. A child from a slave woman wouldn't be your heir. They'd be property. Unless I free them. Unless I legally adopt them. Unless I structure my will very carefully, which as a judge and lawyer, I'm uniquely qualified to do. This is insane. This is necessary. He sat down again, leaning forward. Thomas, listen to me. I've thought this through from every angle. You can't produce children. The doctors were unanimous about that. But children can be produced on your behalf. Delilah is strong, healthy, intelligent. I'll arrange for her to be bred with a suitable male from another plantation. Strong stock, proven fertility, good physical specimens. The children she bears will legally be mine through documentation I'll create. When I die, I'll will them to you along with papers freeing them and establishing them as your adopted heirs. They'll inherit everything. You're talking about breeding human beings like livestock. I'm talking about ensuring the continuation of this family and this plantation.